Hello, so welcome back to week 9, and this week's topic is on the Paris Agreement, and we'll get started right away. So, if you're unfamiliar with the Paris Agreement in general, and you just hear the term Paris Agreement, then the first thing that may come to your mind would be Paris, France. So, let's kind of discuss why this Paris is in this agreement and why this is important related to the environment. So, what exactly is a Paris Agreement? Um, it's basically a contract or form of treaty or agreement from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and you can shorten it for UNFCCC. And the Paris Agreement basically is a legally binding international treaty on climate change. The Paris Agreement, it encourages developed countries to take the lead basically in providing financial assistance to countries that may be less developed and are more vulnerable to these changes. And by more vulnerable to changes, I mean that um, if countries make huge changes in their systems in terms of their economic system or their factory system or whatever it may be, it can have a lot of lasting impacts on smaller countries because they depend so much on the current system they have now. So the Paris Agreement allows countries that are more developed to help out um, maybe smaller countries or less developed countries in terms of working towards a better climate. And 195 nations have signed this agreement, which is a huge number and also a very huge landmark in terms of these UN treaties. And the reason for this is because 195 nations, that many nations, it's the first time that so many nations have joined forces to sign this agreement. It brings all nations that have signed this agreement into a common treaty in order to combat or fight climate change together, and also, like I said before, adapt to the effects that may bring. So you may be asking, what is the reason behind this agreement? Why have so many countries joined hands in order to beat climate change together? The short answer is basically climate change and global crisis. You may have noticed that in a lot of the earlier weeks, we talked about climate change and the global crisis and how it impacts basically all aspects of our environment. So, climate change and global crisis are two very important and urgent issues that the world needs to talk about right now. One of the first reasons behind this agreement may be carbon dioxide. So, carbon dioxide is CO2, as we know, and CO2 is reported to increase at around 406.17 parts per million. So, carbon dioxide is the primary greenhouse gas, and CO2 or carbon dioxide is responsible for about three quarters of emissions. And this carbon dioxide, which is a key greenhouse gas, as we all know, greenhouse gas is very bad for the environment. And carbon dioxide, as a key or main greenhouse gas, it drives climate change for the worse. And carbon dioxide levels continue to rise every month, which is really bad. The next reason may be because of global warming. I think I mentioned this earlier, but again, global warming is a pretty repetitive kind of theme throughout these environmental lessons. We talked about global warming and veganism, we talked about it in local foods and other issues that we talked about in earlier weeks. But again, global warming, for obvious reasons, is one of the reasons behind the agreement, basically. And another reason is the rise in sea level. So as you can see in both the picture and also the graph that I included, sea levels have continued to rise very steadily and very alarmingly fast since in this graph 1995 through 2015. We are currently in the year 2021. So as you can imagine, the sea level has been gradually rising up until this very moment. And in the earlier slide, we talked about global warming and how the temperatures on Earth are getting hotter. So because of the rising temperatures on Earth, the increased ice that has melted results in sea level going up. Another reason is because of the frequent number of natural disasters. For example, I just included hurricanes and storms as some of the key examples, but because of global warming and because of how sick the Earth is, these natural disasters are becoming more and more frequent, which again is one of the reasons behind this treaty. So, what is the purpose of the agreement? So, what is its aim or what is its goal, right? We'll look into it. First goal is global temperature, and let me kind of specify or explain this part a little bit. One of its main goals is to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. So pre-industrial is the state of before all the factories, before all of the pollution, and before all of the development in modern society, basically. And its main goal is to kind of limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius. Another goal is for education on the climate crisis. So, this right now, we're educating ourselves on the climate crisis, and many people believe that the treaty could eventually lead to more education and bring more awareness to this urgent topic. So let's include a little question time in the middle. Were there any other agreements like the Paris Agreement before the actual Paris Agreement? And the answer to that would be yes. There was something called a Kyoto Protocol. Kind of explain what that is. So this protocol requires industrialized countries or modern countries and economies to limit and reduce greenhouse gases. And it asks developed countries to kind of adopt the different policies and measures and report on a regular basis to kind of report back on how they're doing in terms of reducing greenhouse gas. The main difference between the Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocol is that the Paris Agreement, all nations were allowed to join, therefore having 192 or something countries joining hands in fighting climate change. However, for the Kyoto Protocol, it was catered to only first world nations. So that's a very key difference. Unfortunately, on November 4th, the US administration gave a formal notice of intention to withdraw. So basically, this means that the US said, I'm backing away from the Paris Agreement. And this came under the presidency of former President Trump. And I mean, before they kind of withdrew from the agreement, the United States was still required to continue reporting its emissions to the United Nations like before. However, they eventually officially drew or backed away from the agreement on November 4th, 2020. Now, the question is, why did the US back out? The main reason can be summed up into one word: money. Like I included a picture of like a person holding a coin, but that's a short answer. And for me to kind of explain, President Trump at the time thought that keeping up with the Paris Agreement would undermine the US economy and put the US at a permanent disadvantage. And he thought that it would have negative effects on job growth and it would slow down manufacturing and bring about these dramatic declines in coal mining and other natural gas and steel industries. And he said that the Paris Agreement was very unfair to the US in terms of requiring the United States to offer a lot more changes towards the environment compared to other developing countries. So we're kind of looking at how this is viewed or how this was viewed by other nations um, when America said that they would back out of the Paris Agreement. Many Americans were disappointed, especially Democrats, and other nations were disappointed as well. And a lot of people criticized this action as the US having failed as an example of a leading country. The good news is that the US has rejoined in the treaty. With President Joe Biden being elected into office, he has officially reversed the withdrawal from the agreement, and therefore the US is now back into the Paris Agreement. So, questions of the day. The first one is, if you could add another goal to the Paris Agreement, what would it be? Like I added different goals for the Paris Agreement. See right here, purpose of the agreement, like global temperatures and education. So I gave you two examples. So if you could add another goal or purpose to the Paris Agreement, what would it be? And number two, do you personally agree with the US's decision to back out from the Paris Agreement? And obviously, this is speaking from when President Trump was in office. That's it for our presentation. Thank you, and I'll see you next week. Bye.